Hey there, History of St. Louis. Welcome to another lesson. Today, 5.3, we are taking a look at St. Louis and its musical history, basically from ragtime to rap. And one of the things that I love about St. Louis history is just how it talks about all different topics, both artistic, cultural, and today is one of those topics that merges into the history element. So we're going to take a look at St. Louis and music history. So everything that is in red, you're going to want to jot down on a chart. You're going to want to make this chart. And if you wanted to do where the origins of ragtime jazz came from, then that's totally fine with me as well. So if you want to jot down ragtime jazz and above that, jot down African melodies, classical music, spiritual gospels, and the marching band, you can. All of those have a little bit of a impact on ragtime jazz. So then we'll study ragtime jazz and what it sounds like and who was the major St. Louis player of ragtime jazz. Ragtime jazz then evolves into one of two different genres, either smooth jazz, which is the non-vocal kind, or the blues. And the blues is when we start to add vocals to things. The blues really leads to rock and roll along with smooth jazz, but really it's more the blues, even though I have the arrow coming from smooth jazz. And so we'll do rock and roll. Notice how we are forgetting this genre of sound because I don't accept it as an actual viable uh, style of music. So we'll go rock and roll, and then rock and roll leads to R&B, which is known as rhythm and blues. And then from rhythm and blues, we also have disco over here. I can't say that I am not a fan of it, uh, but a lot of musical people cringe at people saying that disco is music, but I like it. I think it's got some catchy tunes. But R&B then leads into rap, rock and roll and R&B. But actually, I'm going to discuss. Actually, I'm not going to discuss here, but if you take a look at the early forms of rap, it actually came from disco. There are a couple uh, disco songs that evolved into rap. And so I'll hit that at the very end here. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and take a look at all five of the red categories and take a look and see just who in St. Louis is connected with those. For ragtime jazz, you're going to want to jot down in your notes somewhere Scott Joplin. And then you're going to focus on all the things that are blue. So he was born in Texas and then moved to the Texas-Arkansas border. And right around age 7, when he makes that move, he starts getting trained into some musical instruments, namely the piano, where he had a classical music teacher named Julius Weiss. And then, but then he also learned to play the banjo, which was more of a local instrument. So he was trained both classically on the piano, but then also developed a love of local music with the banjo, and that's going to be key for when we talk about ragtime jazz. In 1901, he will move to St. Louis. He had already done some things in ragtime jazz before his move to St. Louis. But when he gets here, he will also begin to hit a real creative point in his life um, and has some of his biggest hits while here in St. Louis. In 1899, not in St. Louis, he will publish the Maple Leaf Rag. All songs in ragtime are known as rags. And so he will do the Maple Leaf Rag. And then one of his big hits in St. Louis is going to be The Entertainer. And that is done in 1902. Later on, he does a ragtime opera named Tremonisha. And then in 1916, he catches syphilis, and that ends up messing with his brain, and he is placed into a mental institution where he later dies. Um, and so at this time, I'm going to have the teacher who should have the maple leaf rag and the entertainer ready to go. They're going to press pause on this, and then I want them to play for you what the maple leaf rag sounds like and the entertainer. They are both well-known songs from the uh, ragtime genre. Um, the thing that you'll notice when you hear ragtime is that number one, it is all instrumental, and that is something that you need to jot down, and I really should have had it on this page. That it is all instrumental and that it is primarily the piano. Um, it is also very controversial at the time when it comes out because it is number one seen as black music or African American music, and this is, remember, the day and age of segregation, and so as a black form of music it was somewhat controversial. And then it was also controversial because it was played in bars and brothels, and so not the greatest of places as far as the accepted social scene is concerned. And so for those two reasons, it is controversial. When it hits the World's Fair, as you learned about from the video, if you saw the World's Greatest Fair documentary, uh, the fair the fair organizers were afraid that people would love this so much that they wouldn't go and listen to all the other musical acts, and so they put this on the pike instead of in the actual uh, at the actual fair. So at this time, the teacher's going to play for you the Maple Leaf Rag and the Entertainer. This is the Scott Joplin House in St. Louis. It's if you take Highway 40 to, I believe, Jefferson and make a left onto Jefferson and go north, you run into this. This is where he lived in St. Louis. It is now a museum dedicated to him and ragtime jazz. And if you are in the music scene, it's definitely a place where you need to go visit. From ragtime, we then move into smooth jazz, which continues with just the instrumental element of music. And for smooth jazz, we have Miles Davis. And if anybody is into jazz music, you know that he is probably in the top three, next to John Coltrane. And then there are a bunch of others, but he and John Coltrane are kind of the godfathers of early jazz. Um, he is born in Alton, Illinois, then moves to East St. Louis, but then travels into St. Louis in order to play. At age 10, he was so prolific that he was actually playing with high school kids, even though he was basically in fifth grade. At age 18, he is accepted into the most prestigious fine arts school in the United States, Juilliard. It's sort of seen as the Harvard of the art schools, and there he is trained in music even more so. In 1948, after graduation from there, he goes ahead and starts his first jazz group called Cool Jazz. Unfortunately for him, shortly thereafter, he begins, unfortunately, a connection with drugs that he will quit, but because he hit it so hard during that time period, he is going to do lasting damage to his body. Eventually, will have to retire because of poor health due to that drug and alcohol abuse, and then dies at the age of 65 in 1991. There is a movie about him. I believe it's called Milestones, that features Don Cheadle as Miles Davis. I've heard good things about it. I have not seen it myself. And then the two songs that I want you to hear from him are Milestones, which was created in 1958, and then So What. Um, so you will notice with him, if the piano is what ragtime is, jazz is going to incorporate more instruments. It's going to go from just the piano to uh, a drum. You'll also hear a bass, and then you usually hear some sort of wind instrument. And for Miles Davis, that instrument was the trumpet. So you're going to want to jot down that the trumpet is most connected with Miles Davis. You'll notice that in ragtime jazz, it's a very fast-paced uh, sounding music. That is why it was very well used in silent movies. Every time there was a chase scene, you would hear ragtime jazz in the background. When you listen to milestones, milestones will be that fast-paced uh, style as well. But when you hear so what is going to be that slower jazz that Miles Davis was also known for. And so milestones is going to be more like the ragtime upbeat, but then you also have so what, which is more low key. So go ahead and listen to both of those and be able to recognize them. Okay, so now we move to another gentleman who I'm a real big fan of in the jazz world today is Jeremy Davenport. He now lives in New Orleans, Louisiana, but does come up here once a year to do a jazz concert in St. Louis. He is trained with the Marcellus Brothers, who are also well known in the jazz community. He also played in a band with Harry Connick Jr. And I'm a real big fan of his. So if you ever are interested in jazz, I highly suggest you look him up. He's more of the vocal jazz, though, so he is a singer. It's not just instrumental. So then we evolve from the blues to rock and roll. The blues basically takes jazz and adds lyrics to it, and then rock and roll will basically electrify the blues. And so for rock and roll, we have Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was born in 1926. Um, he always knew that he was going to be in the music world. Uh, he wanted to be initially a singer, like his idol Nat King Cole. But then I believe once the electric guitar came out, he became a huge fan of the electric guitar and becomes one of the godfathers of the electric guitar and rock and roll. He will start a band called Muddy Waters, and then in 1955, he will be signed to his first major record deal with a Chicago record company called Chess Records. And that gives him his big deal. Um, his early songs, which sort of make him stand out, include Johnny Be Good, which comes out in 58, and before that, Roll Over Beethoven in 56. He also had a well-known song called Maybelline, which is the name of his guitar. And so he becomes a big thing. Johnny Be Good, if you've ever seen the movie Back to the Future with Michael J. Fox, great 1980s movie. That is the song that he plays at that prom scene toward the end of the music. So at this time, the teacher's going to stop and want you to pick out both Johnny Be Good and Roll Over Beethoven. Go ahead and jot down the electric guitar as his major instrument. Basically, what he does is he takes the jazz quartet and takes out the wind instrument and substitutes it with the electric guitar. So he keeps the drum, he keeps the piano, he keeps the bass, but he switches out the wind instrument and adds the electric guitar. So check out Johnny Be Good and Roll Over Beethoven. For those of you who are musically inclined, you're going to have to talk to your fellow students and tell them what you hear is the major difference between Johnny Be Good and Roll Over Beethoven, because they sound a lot alike. But there are some nuanced differences that you will be able to hear, but I usually have to have my more musical students point those out. So go ahead and do that. And then also, you can also have the teacher at some point in time show you what the duck walk is. The duck walk was Chuck Berry's famous move. If Michael Jackson was famous for doing the moonwalk, and Beyonce is famous for doing the all the single ladies dance, Chuck Berry's signature move was the duck walk. And so take a look at that and see what that's like. Here it is, actually. Here is the duck walk. Oops. Well, I don't think it's going to let me play this, but uh, that was a video that was connected with the duck walk. So first we go to, then we go next to our rhythm and blues, which is sort of a jazzier version of rock and roll. It kind of goes back and connects jazz and rock and roll a little bit better. And for St. Louis, that is our introduction to Anna Mae Bullock. That's her real name, but you know her as Tina Turner. Anna Mae Bullock was born in Tennessee, but raised with her grandmother because her mother decided to move to St. Louis, and so she stayed with her grandmother in Tennessee. When her grandmother died at age 14, she moved to St. Louis with her mother and her sister. And at that early age, she started hanging around nightclubs because she was such a musical talent. And although she was underage, because of her talent, she was allowed to sing there. And eventually she caught the eye of another musician named Ike Turner. And together they start a professional relationship that will eventually become romantic and will involve them both professionally and personally for a good amount of time. I am going to, at this time, introduce you to one song of hers where they were together, and that is called Proud Mary. But the teacher needs to play that song toward the middle of the song. The first part of the song is more of the jazzy, slow part. And then right in the middle of the song, there's a quick conversion to a more faster paced rock and roll. And that's where I want the teacher to play it from so that you can hear both elements of the song. It's right around 2 minutes into the song that you hear it. And so that is probably their most famous song together. And then I'll tell you what happens after that. So that was their song together, Proud Mary. Do not call it Rolling Down the River, even though that's the most famous line. It is Proud Mary. Eventually, they moved to LA together. They do get married. And then about 15 years into their marriage, Tina Turner decides to leave because of all the mental and physical abuse. And it got so bad that she literally decided to leave him with just the clothes on her back and 36 cents in her purse. But she was so desperate to get out that she just decided to leave. And she said, "You can keep everything. I just want to keep my name, Tina Turner, and I want to keep the kid." And that's ended up what happening. And then she began her solo career. And in the early 80s, she sets out on her solo career. And at this point in time, the one that really launches her into solo stardom is the 1984 hit, What's Love Got to Do with It, which I believe is also the movie that covers her story as well. So I want you to hear that song and just get to where you hear the chorus where she sings What's Love Got to Do with It. Just be able to pick out those two. The songs are totally different. You can hear the R&B, whereas the 1980s song is definitely more like a little bit of pop music, but it's still a little R&B involved. So go ahead and play that. All righty, so that's Tina Turner. Here's a little video that I can't play for you right now of her with Ike Turner. And then this is her in the 1984 version of her video of What's Love Got to Do with It. So you can see that the 1980s big hair was definitely a part of the Tina Turner experience. And one of the most phenomenal dancers as well. If you've ever seen a show of hers, she really puts on a show with her dancing as much as she does with her music. And so from rap, How do we get to rap? Well, first we have disco. If you ever have heard the song Good Times by Chic, which is one of those classic disco songs, and you can have the teacher potentially play it for you. If you play Good Times by Chic, and then you look up one of the earliest rap songs that there is, the rap song is called Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang, you will see that they use as their background song that they sample, they use Good Times by Chic. And so they use a disco song to create one of the first rap songs of all time. And that is my historical documentation of how disco leads to rap. But as far as St. Louis goes, St. Louis rap starts with Nelly. Nelly's real name is Cornell Hayes Jr. He does go to University City High School, and he lives in University City. In 1996, he will form a band with some of his high school friends known as the St. Lunatics. They have a couple of local hits. They are well known in the St. Louis area, and I think they travel maybe to Columbia and Kansas City and maybe even Chicago. But they are primarily known as the St. Louis band. And in St. Louis, they are listened to by Universal Records at one of their shows. And after the show, Universal Records approaches Nelly and say, "We love you, we love your sound. We just don't want the group, we want you." And so Nelly had to make a choice about whether or not to stay with the group or go solo. He talked it over with the other members of the St. Lunatics, and they end up deciding to go and break up to let Nelly go solo. And so when he decides to go solo, his first solo album is called Country Grammar. The first big hit off of Country Grammar is Country Grammar. And so at that point, St. Louis rap is invented. So I'll have the teacher play for you Nelly's Country Grammar, although I'm sure most of you have heard it before. So here is Country Grammar by Nelly. All right, finally, some other just well-known St. Louis musicians. If you've ever heard of the yacht rock genre of 70s jazz or jazzy rock and roll or slow rock and roll, Michael McDonald joins the Doobie Brothers, and then he ends up going on to some solo albums. He has got one of the most iconic voices of all time. Definitely, you have heard him before if you've listened to anything from the 1970s and early 80s. It seems like he was doing background for just about everybody, or he was featured on a lot of albums. Bluegrass and American Roots, T-Bone Burnett is another well-known St. Louisan. And then in the opera scenery, Grace Brumbry is a well-known opera singer from the St. Louis area as well. And I am sure I'm leaving out some more local, current St. Louisans, but I am just not as much into the local scene as I had been in the past. When you get older, that happens. So maybe you and your teacher can discuss who some of the local St. Louis artists are. But that's our look at St. Louis and its music history. It's a pretty well documented one, and I hope you learned something today.